Welcome back to the Dream Team Intensive. In this training video, we're going to be covering switching to the new model. So let's begin. In this module, we're going to be covering the free machines, the new model to scale more with less, and of course, how to start scaling. So let's get into the lessons. Of course, we'll start out with the free machines, and understanding where you are at and where you need to go, of course, makes the journey a whole lot easier. Now, with that being said, all businesses go through the free machine models, and in most cases, even slipping in and out of them at different stages as well. The first is, of course, as us, the machine, whereby we're doing all of the work, we're doing the prospecting, the closing of the clients, we are responding to clients. We are pretty much a gunslinger for hire, right? A freelancer, a contractor. We are self-employed at this point. And then in order to grow, we move on to the next level of the machine, which is typically us leveraged. Now this is whereby we have a small team that we're coordinating, we are controlling the workflow, assigning tasks. However, we may still be the main touch point for all clients, for our team, and in some scenarios we may even have to be redoing the work as our team might be completing incorrectly, or they might still need our help to complete a few of the more complex tasks that we are assigning them as well. And where we want to end up, of course, is a production line business, which is essentially customers come in, the service is delivered, and the team handles problems just as if we were handling it, all without us even knowing about it as well. Now, business owners get stuck at level 1 and 2 because they mistakenly think that knowing how to do a specific thing, such as a service that our clients and customers need, is all it takes to make the business work, right? We may think that our skill set, the thing that the customer is hiring us for, is the only thing that we need to know in order to scale. And it is typically common that business owners that only focus on delivering a better product and service and selling more of that product or service will forever be caught up in the first 2 levels. So if you only focus on improving your product quality, helping your customers out more, trying to produce a higher quality product or service, you will probably forever be stuck at these 2 points here. And this prevents them from graduating onto the final stage because they focus on technical expertise rather than on developing set business knowledge to scale with systems. And the important thing isn't the commodity, which is what is produced, right? That could be the product, the service, the trade. What the important thing is how it is produced. Therefore, the business itself is the product rather than what the business actually produces. Now, we most likely started on this journey as an entrepreneur who had a vision and a marketable skill, service, product, or trade. Now, this alone will not serve us moving forward, and I think you know that, and that tends to be true across every single industry. Most people own their business merely because they can excel at their work in a certain field, and this is quite common as to why people start their own company is they want to be self-employed, and they're good at their skill set. However, the time has come to learn a new skill set of developing processes, engineering systems, coordinating a team, developing leadership skills, and becoming a business owner, not a business operator. If we stay stuck in this technician phase, which can be defined as someone who is doing the work within the company, from the prospecting to the accounting to the service delivery, we will become exhausted and eventually give up. This typically leads to us falling out of love with our business as it becomes more of a job than something that we own, which can of course lead to delivering an inferior product to our customers, which is where the downward spiral starts. And this is typically seen across all industries, whereby the person who started the company is overworked, they get exhausted, they don't enjoy it so much anymore, and since they don't enjoy it so much anymore, they don't spend as much time improving on it, and since they don't spend as much time improving on it, eventually the customers begin going elsewhere and the business starts to decay over time. And of course, we do not want that to happen to you or the work that you do. So therefore, it is critical to learn this skill set before moving forward. And the formula for producing a production line style business is actually quite simple. We need to start by cultivating a process engineer's mindset and treat our business like a machine. And we have to understand that our business is not us. We can step outside of it, we can change it, and we can do anything we want to our business. The engine we should be building should translate our vision into reality through planning and developing systems that can deliver the technician's skill set at scale, regardless of who is operating as well. And I like to commonly refer to this as legally cloning ourselves, in the sense that if we can take our expertise, if we can take what our top team members are currently doing within the organization and engineer those into processes, well, they're the closest things to clones that we will have. And therefore, anyone who steps into that process will be able to operate it regardless of skill set. Now, as we go on this journey, you could say that while we are going to work on our business, we start to realize that it is a powerful metaphor for going to work on ourselves, with the goal of creating more life for everyone who comes into contact with the business, your customers, your team, and most importantly, the person who owns it as well. And again, as I said before in the previous training module, for our business to change, we must change, as our present business situation is a reflection of our habits, our priorities, who we are, and of course including our limitations as well. So in order to achieve this outcome, we need to switch to the new model of scaling more with less. And that should be the main objective that we should be trying to scan everything through, if it be our personal life, our health, our company, is how can we get the highest return on our time and our energy. And the approach to that is trying to do more with less. How can we achieve the utmost crucial outcome with as little of input as possible? And it's a very different lens and a very different view from what's commonly referred to as hustle culture, in terms of you're judged through the work you put in, the hours you put in, as opposed to the outcome, right? And for us, we should be prioritizing the outcome and reducing the amount of input that we need to achieve that outcome as well. So this is what we like to refer to inside the Dream Team Intensive as a new model to scale more with less. So what typically happens, and you may have seen this before, depending on if you've seen our content online, but essentially this is what most companies tend to do, is that they would have someone on their team going through a certain process, and at some point, if that be a task or an actual process or a customer support situation, there's always going to be a problem or question that comes up. And what always happens, of course, is that the team takes that problem or question and asks us or ask our team leader about that problem or question. And of course, we are more than happy to get involved. We are more than happy to solve that problem or question because we want this process to be completed. So, as our team asks us that problem or question, what do we do as the CEO, as the team lead? Well, of course, we generate an answer or some form of extra team training. And as a result, we provide that answer and that form of team training into our team. Now, if we keep this loop operating over time, what is going to end up happening, of course, is that as we provide these answers to our team, as we provide them with team training, of course, our team is going to improve over time. Their skill set, their knowledge, their expertise, how they interpret the processes, how they solve problems is going to improve over time. Now, that doesn't sound that dramatic. However, if we put a freeze frame there for a moment and look at what we're going to be suggesting to you inside the Dream Team Intensive, is that if our team is going through a process and a question comes up, well, we know that that question or problem came about because of the process, right? In the sense that maybe there was room for assumption, maybe there was room for interpretation, maybe there was room for creativity, maybe there was certain assumed knowledge when we created that process, maybe there was assumed expertise, maybe there were certain inputs that weren't accounted for, maybe something changed inside the environment of where that process is actually operated. And because of this, because there's holes inside the process, a question or problem came about, right? No one comes up with a question out of nowhere, or no problem just appears. Something happened upstream inside the process to generate that problem or to generate that question. Now, if we know this to be true, and our team comes to us and presents us with that problem or question about that process, then rather than giving the answer to our team, right? Rather than giving them the answer or the extra training to overcome that problem, we should be saying to our team, really good question, I'm not going to answer you. Instead, I'm going to update the process, go through again, and you'll find your answer. And of course, what this achieves over time is that if we keep conducting this loop and not installing the answers and not installing the team training into the minds of our team, but installing those updates into the process, of course, our processes improve over time. Now, this is what we need in order to scale, because in this scenario, while this is great, if this team member decides to leave, we lose all the upgrades, we lose all that improved answers, all that team training, all that knowledge, all that contextual understanding inside those team members. As opposed to in this scenario, if this team member decides to leave, it's not as dramatic because we've taken all their improved knowledge, all their questions, every single problem that they've ever encountered, and we've installed it into the process. This means that as we hire someone new, they can literally start where the previous person left off, because we've installed our old team's brain essentially into the process. It also makes scaling so much more easier, whereby in the previous approach, if we were relying on team training and team expertise solely and not upgrading our processes, every time we hire someone new, so if we have a team member, we then have to train them, right? And there's always that learning curve. And if we hire someone new, well, we need to train them from the start again, and we need to answer the common questions again, and we need to address the problems again and again, right? And this is a very slow stop-start way to scaling, as opposed to in this scenario, we can hire any team member, plug them into that process, and probably generate a predictable result, because any question that has been asked from anyone in the history of our company should have been should have been stored inside the process and also updating it as well. This makes hiring and scaling so much more easier. There's more predictability because of every new problem, every new question, we're updating and improving our processes first rather than updating our team, because a team is someone that we rent to run our processes. As a company, a business is a collection of processes. We own those processes, right? So if our team decides to leave, we've captured their genius, we've stored their questions, we've improved their training inside the process rather than answering them directly. And this is extremely common with any in-house team. For example, your team comes flying into your office and they say, oh, I have a question, I need help ASAP. We ourselves, as the CEO, have to resist the urge to verbally provide that answer to our team. We shouldn't say, great question, I'm not going to answer you, I'm going to improve the process, go through it again and you'll find your answer. Or if you're going to answer them, record the answer. Give it to them so they can act on it immediately, and then copy the exact recording, exactly word for word, into the process. Now that's quite hard to do, so I much more prefer to suggest update the process, force your team to go through it again. Now, in order to achieve this new model, whereby we scale on good systems first, whereby a process improves the more it is operated, in the sense that as our team is going through a process, they bring us problems. As they bring us problems, we update and improve the process, right? And the more that this process operates, the more it improves over time. So that's what I mean in the terms of whereby a process improves the more it is operated. And a lot of CEOs and team leaders don't think about how important it is to improve a process through allowing it to be operated by our team. A lot of CEOs and team leaders think that they should be the ones finding problems, finding holes. No. The person operating the process will bring us problems and the holes that need to be corrected when it's being operated in the real world, as opposed to in an isolated vacuum, whereby we think about what would the dream scenario be if this was to run perfectly smooth every single time, which of course it never does. So therefore, putting it into the hands of someone else will highlight where the holes in the process are. Now, in order to achieve this, we need to have these three components. The first and probably the most important one is a solid foundational understanding of systems, how to build them, why they work, why they do not work, and what to do about it. Now, of course, we are currently covering this in Module 1, which you're going through right now, Module 2, and Module 4 of the Dream Team Intensive. And then, once we understand these foundations, once we internalize them, once we have the skill set of actually knowing, okay, well, here's how we engineer processes to clone creativity, to clone A players, to self-solve for problems, we then have to have the second component. And that is a well-designed, easy-to-use team portal that hosts our systems, that hosts our team, and that tracks everything moving inside the company. Now, the reason that this is in Module 3 and not in Module 4 is that we need to create this first before we build our systems. So we understand, then we build the place to host the systems and processes, then we actually go and then we create them. Okay, we need to have this created first before we go ahead and create the actual processes. And before we create the team portal, where it will host our systems and processes, we need to understand what the hell we are doing. We need to understand how to spot problems, how to prioritize what processes need to be created, how to understand the impact of, okay, if I'm going to prioritize this process first, what impact is that going to have on everything else, and am I comfortable with the cost of this? Then, of course, once we have that in play, we then need to have a team with strong communication skills in order to help us diagnose problems and improve our systems. And of course, we cover this in module 5 and 6 as well. Now, a lot of the time, and we will talk about this in the coming training modules, however, I'll touch on it now in the sense that a lot of companies prioritize skill set over strong communication skills. Now, the number one component of a company that can scale is a team that can communicate effectively, not for the reasons you think it is. The most important reason we need strong communication skills inside our team is that if something goes wrong, we need our team to tell us what went wrong and how they think it went wrong. For example, if John's going through a process and something terrible happens, I do not want John to say, well, I'm not sure what happened. This thing, I followed the process and it went wrong. That's not helpful. I can't correct that problem from John. However, if John has really sharp and articulate communication skills, he would say to me, I was going through this process and at step 23Q and 24A, I was confused if you meant this input or that input. So I decided to go with this input. Was that the correct one to go with? Okay, John, I can solve that problem. Now I know exactly where the process broke down. John told me because he has good communication skills. I can now update and improve it, right? We do not want a team that is overly technical with low communication skills. We want to prioritize communication skills over the technical skill set because that will help us to improve our processes over time. And that will remove the dependency on our team and put the dependencies on our processes first and foremost. Now, all of this is predicated on having really strong, well-engineered processes, which is, of course, why we're going through it in the order that we are going through it inside the Dream Team Intensive. The first point, Module 1, we talk about how to think about systems and processes and start planning. Module 2, we optimize what we currently have to make things easier so that we have the time and space to create what needs to be created. Then, Module 3, we set up our team portal, which will host everything we are about to build in Module 4. In Module 4, we get to work and we start to make our lives even more easier. We make them easier in Module 1. Module 4, we reach freedom. And I can guarantee you that if you follow the steps that we're outlining here inside the Dream Team Intensive and you complete the work, you do the work, it is near impossible for you not to create freedom, however you define that, from a time, from an energy, from an income point of view, using processes by the 4th training module. And I've seen it time and time again with hundreds of clients now. So we have to follow this process perfectly. And then, of course, Module 5, we bring in our team, we hire them, we train them, we assign them to processes, and Module 6, we become a good leader and manage our team properly so that we ourselves can improve the company over time with the help of our team who has strong communication skills. Now, the all too common story is that typically the business owner is tired of the stress due to doing everything themselves, so they go for the instant fix if they have the resources available. And what that looks like is that they reason to themselves that, hey, if I hire a really expensive employee with a lot of experience, I wouldn't need to do or teach them anything. They would just know. So they hire a new team member with 20 years of experience as an example, and almost instantly they discover the mistake that they have made. And you may have encountered this personally. I know that I have. I know that, again, hundreds of our clients have inside the Dream Team Intensive, and that is that with experience comes years and even decades of possible bad habits. Although their experience doesn't bring you problems, since they know what they are doing, sometimes the customers can become unhappy. And in this example scenario, the complaints from those customers could be that the new experienced technicians may not be following any form of protocol. Maybe they were making it up as they went along based on their experience, or fixing things that did not need to be fixed. Now, this one is extremely common, and this can result in undermining the work that was done previously and customers' expectations being mismatched with what the business may have sold and promised them. Now, the new hire, who is a experienced A player, who's someone who brings a lot to the table, may not have been trying to do any harm. They just thought they knew better and did not need to follow the steps. After all, they've been doing it for 20 plus years. Now, the old saying that you can't teach an old dog new tricks is true in business and in teams. Experienced new hires are unlikely to learn a new way of doing things, since they may have been working in the industry longer than our business has been around. Now, this typically gets worse the more experience a technician has. And it is also far too common that when an experienced hire begins doing things their way, the business generates higher levels of profit and success, which sounds like a great thing, right? However, this quickly becomes problematic over the coming months and years when the business owner realizes that the entire operation is reliant on their new experienced hire, right? You bring someone in to solve problems. The worst thing that they can do is solve those problems, because now you're reliant on them maintaining the systems, the tools, the clients, the schedules that they have set up for themselves to solve their problems that they are handling. When the experienced hire realizes this, when they become self-aware of how important they are to the company, either due to them taking a sick day and everything coming to a screeching halt, or their workload piling up due to the business owner being unable to replicate their work without them, they can silently take over, which can be in the form of either them demanding a huge pay rise, a larger cut of the profit which the company is generating, or part ownership in the business. And this is a very strange place to end up in, because you've hired them as an employee to solve problems. They've solved problems, they've made your life easier, and now they're turning around and possibly demanding to take a lot of what is yours, right? Which is not fair, but we've kind of allowed them to take over in the sense that we're reliant on them. And once they become aware of this, this is far too common in multiple industries, especially if it's a new hire, right? If you're just new to hiring and you hire someone who has really sharp skill sets, it's not uncommon for them to see their own potential in your company and to want to either, again, demand a higher pay raise, take a larger cut of the profit pie, or even ask for part ownership in the company as well. And if the business owner meets any of these demands, the experienced A player will now get confirmation and become even more self-aware of just how needed they are. If they begin to run the numbers in their head, it is very likely that after you meet their demands, after you pay them more, after you give them a percentage of the profit, after you give them part ownership, and they go, oh, actually, okay, I have now been confirmed, I now have it confirmed that I am important, that I am good, and that I can really demand anything I want, so why don't I just start up my own competing business with our customer base. Now, this is the worst case scenario that we will ever encounter, but you'll be surprised how common it is in your industry. Or if the A player is driven by such rewards and they do not want to start their own company, but they are driven by income, then how long do you think until they accept higher pay or more rewards for their talents from a competing company via headhunting, right? So the end result of this is either they will start their own competing company and take our clients, or they will get headhunted. Now, probably the headhunting is more common than it is for our technicians to start up their own company, and this process won't happen. It won't happen immediately, right? It might take 2 or 3 years to manifest, but it's very common, and I hear it almost every single day on the calls that I do, inside our hands-on calls, inside the group. I don't want you to fall prey to this trap, right? And that's why the Dream Team Intensive exists, is that if you complete the work and you do exactly what we say and follow the new approach for scaling, you won't end up in this terrible position. So therefore, we are starting with a systems first approach rather than a teams first approach. Okay, so we're not saying that teams are important. Of course, we need teams and we need a good team. However, we need to start with a systems first approach rather than a team first approach. Now, sometimes businesses will seek a spur of the moment global solution, quick fix to all of their problems in one fell swoop, typically with a expensive A player, as we have just discussed. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should not hire A players or good talent. However, I see business owners hire them too soon, and usually for the wrong reasons. And the wrong reasons can be defined as, well, if it's too soon, you might have no systems in place, and they end up doing everything for us with no systems and no processes. Well, now the business is dependent on them. Or again, another example where it could be too soon is that we have not created a environment that allows an A player to earn their keep. This could be in the sense that we don't have the right tools for them. We don't have the right parts for them to use. We have ongoing problems, right? Which slows them down and keeps us frustrated that this person is costing us so much and there's still constant problems and we're bleeding cash. Or we hire them for the wrong reasons, which can be to fix problems that the business does not fully understand. And that's probably the worst place to end up, is that we are hiring someone to solve problems that we don't fully understand or comprehend yet as well. Now, the inverse of that is, of course, to hire them for the right reasons, which is, of course, our entire team is running smoothly and you want to remove yourself from the managing role. Well, now it's time to hire an A player. Or all your behind the scenes systems and delivery systems are complete and operational, and now you need to build a customer facing team, right? So we have all the behind systems and protocols and procedures and checklists and quality control triggers designed, engineered, and they're operating smoothly. Our product can now be produced without us needing to get involved. Fantastic. Now let's hire customer-facing team members, right? People who are switched on, articulate, who can close sales or who can interact with the customers while the product is being produced behind closed doors. Or you have developed a complex solution to a hard problem with a plan, and now you need talent to execute against that plan as you lead them. Right now, the opposite of this is, of course, having talent create the plan and solve the problems for us. We don't want that. Instead, we need to develop a complex solution to a hard problem with a plan, which is, of course, in the form of processes. Now, terrific employees are out there, and we will hire them together if we need to for your business during Module 5. Before that, we have work to do. And within a non-documented business, no one functions anywhere near their potential or to our expectations, because mind reading and fortune telling are unfortunately things that humans can not do yet. Now, think of skill and expertise as context. The how to do. This is helpful but not enough. And then think of systems and processes as the what to do and the when to do it and to what standards, right? So if we do not have the what to do, the when to do it, and the standards to actually meet when they are completing that task, we we are just handing our team a task to do, and they have to guess. They have to make assumptions. And when people have to guess and make assumptions, it's usually typically wrong. And this is regardless of how advanced their IQ is, or how much work experience they have, or how good their education is. If someone has the know-how, they know how to do a certain task, but they don't know what to do the task against, they don't know when to run that task, or they don't know to what standards, then no matter how advanced their IQ or their work experience has been, or how good their education is, they're going to be taking a guess in the dark, and they're going to be making assumptions again and again, depending on how they feel on that day. So we don't want to achieve that, right? We instead want to make our lives as easy as possible. And in order to achieve that, we need to start scaling properly. So we've just covered the new model for scaling. Now let's actually go into, okay, how do we start applying this, and how do we actually start scaling with this new model in mind? So here's how to start scaling. Now, the path to scaling can seem quite complex and foggy at times. With all these moving parts and tools and teams and rules, where do we start? Well, despite what people want to hear, we start by doing the work ourselves. Then we build a system around it. This process rebuilds until we have systemized ourselves out of a job. Now, this is critical to scale properly. And essentially, this boils down to understand before we systemize. And hopefully, if you've been completing the work, which we discussed in the last training module, you have this pinned up on your wall. And of course, the number one thing to remember is we must understand before we systemize. Okay, so when we do this, we have to do the work. We have to build a process around the work that we have just done. Then we move up within our own business, all right? So I'll give you some more tangible examples, because there are a few scenarios where we can have our team achieve this, but we have to organize it in the right sequence as well. And of course, if you haven't got this printed out and you haven't posted yourself in front of it, as weird as that sounds, it is a cultural thing inside the Dream Team Intensive. And the more that the group can see you and see your face and who you are, and the more that you're seen inside the school community, the more that the group will be inclined to help you out when you need them as well. And of course, changing your working environment to reflect where you want to go as opposed to where you are, and that can be through art and through the things you consume in your environment, but it also can be through the pin-ups that you will be printing and gluing to the walls in your office throughout the Dream Team Intensive. And of course, this is the first one, and probably the most important one here is the only 4 things that matter. And quite honestly, if you're not comfortable completing this small task, which is of course printing this and gluing it to your wall, then it's going to be quite questionable to see complete future tasks and future work inside the Dream Team Intensive. I know it sounds like a trivial thing, but the more we get you to implement, the easier it is to get you to implement in the future. So please do take our advice. Please do complete the work and follow our instructions accordingly. Now, that being said, if we want to build a strong process for a task or a decision or a project, we ourselves as a system designer must know how it should be done, right? And this really comes down to, what do we want to build? What do we want our company to produce? We need to know this before we go out and try to achieve it. Otherwise, how do we know if we've achieved it, if we've aligned ourselves to the goal, or if things are being done correctly? We need to understand it before we systemize it. We need to understand the constraints, the conditions, conditions, certain examples, certain triggers that start that task, certain decisions that might come up in that task, what to not do, what it should look like at the start, the middle, and the end of that task, and of course everything in between that as well. Only by doing it ourselves can we truly understand. And once we understand, we can systemize it. And once we can systemize it, we never have to do that task again. We don't have to master the craft, we only need to understand it. Okay, so if you own a web design company, you don't need to understand every line of code. However, you need to understand what are the constraints of the platform. What does a good website look like? What is the process and the order that you design a site in? Do you start with the header? Do you start with the text? Do you start with the framework, right? You need to understand before you can systemize it, or our team will be shooting in the dark. Now, this also makes hiring so much more easier, as once we understand how the task should be operated, and once we systemize it, we now can screen people a lot easier, right? Because we know what to attract with our hiring systems. We can talk the language of the task, of the process. We know what to expect. How long should that task take someone on our team to complete? If we understand that it takes us 2 hours to complete that task and our team takes 4 hours, and okay, well, something's not quite right here. Okay, so in understanding, we get all these upsides of knowing how to design the process correctly, of knowing what standard it should be complete to, of knowing what skill set someone should have in order to complete that task, in knowing how long it should take to complete that task, and knowing what it should look like at the end once that task is complete. We ourselves need to understand something before we can systemize it. And this also makes it so much more easier to know what to expect, what to prioritize for this task, and of course how the task should look once it is complete. So to give you a visual example of this, let's say these are some of the tasks inside your company, and let's say that you're currently doing all of these tasks yourselves. Okay, so these icons represent us spinning the task ourselves. Well, first we want to do the task. Then once we do the task, we can then understand it, and then once we understand it, we build a system around that. And once we build a system or process around that, well, then we can take that process and we can hand it to someone else to operate it. And once they start operating it, we can now remove ourselves from that task and never have to worry about it ever again. Then of course we choose something else. So let's say, for example, okay, well, I'm now going to be completing this service delivery so that I understand it, and then once I understand it, I can build a process around it. And then after I build a process around it, I then can hand that to my team to complete it for me. And since they are completing it for me, I don't need to be doing it anymore. Okay, so it's this kind of process of we need to take the load ourselves. We need to carry it to understand how it should be carried. Then we need to build a process around that. And as we achieve that, we no longer have to complete it ever again. Another example, from there, after we complete these two, we might move on to customer support tasks. We then complete that ourselves for maybe 1 or 2 days, or maybe 2 to 3 weeks, depending how many processes there are inside that customer support system. Then, of course, what do? We build a process around that. We then hand that off to our team. Then our team completes it, and that is removed from our schedule. And slowly over time, we begin to systemize ourselves out of a job. And this will continue up the hierarchy until all that we are completing is really the owner task, right? And that should be coordinating cash flow, hiring, delegating to our team, managing the capital of the company as well. And it is a process of doing the work to understand it, then to understand to systemize, then to systemize to assigning it to our team or outsourcing it to someone else. This is the fundamental approach to rule number 1 inside the Dream Team Intensive, is understand before we systemize. And we don't have to understand it to be an expert. We have to understand it to understand what it should look like at the end, how the task should be complete, how long it should take. We have to know enough to be somewhat deadly to talk the language, because that makes hiring easier. That makes designing the process easier. That makes updating the process easier. If you have a look at any of the top CEOs in the globe, they were once on the tools. They were once coordinating the processes. When Elon Musk started PayPal, he designed it himself. Like, he knew the inner workings of that company. Same with Amazon. He started that himself. He built everything, then he built a process to continue building, then he hired someone else, right? So he systemized himself out of a job, and we need to take that same approach when we begin to systemize ourselves up the hierarchy, okay? Until everything that we've created behind us is now operating smoothly. Now, we always need to start from the tools back, okay? Now, if this is one of the rules that I think we can all come to agree with inside the Dream Team Intensive, the next rule that comes immediately under that is to start from the tools back first. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, we always start this process of understanding to systemize from the tools back. The tools are the closest to the work and the furthest away from our customers. Now, the reason behind that is that when we are creating a process, if something goes wrong and it's on the tools, which is the furthest away from the customers, we can correct the task, the process, before any customers see. Okay, so we don't want to be starting out with the processes for our prospecting team, or for our customer support team, or for our sales team, because if these go wrong, they're going to impact the cash flow of the company, or the product of the company, or what the customers will end up seeing. Now, the other reason behind this, of why we should be starting from the tools back, should be that it moves us from the tools back first, from doing the behind the scenes work to now spending more time doing important customer facing roles, such as customer service, delivery, sales, and management. This can translate to, we need to be starting with the tasks, the roles that are behind the scenes, if it be the admin work, the prospecting, the graphic design, the social media, the accounting, anything that is behind the scenes that the customer is not going to see immediately, we start there. This usually translates into the very last role we should be building systems and hire for is, of course, sales. This is the last thing that we should be trying to remove from our plate. If we have a look at this diagram here, ideally, the sales and just the sales component should be the last thing that we should be trying to remove from our plates. The reason for that is that in most cases, the owner knows how to sell really well. So therefore, if we remove everything else from their plate and put them on the sales, the company can grow. And as the owner is only doing sales, they begin to understand what they are doing. And that allows them to create a process to have someone else complete that as well. Now, we keep building systems until we are only doing the customer-facing work by building systems around everything else behind us. Again, starting from the tools back first. So that is the other rule, is that, okay, if we're going to understand before we systemize, we start with the tasks that are closest to the tools. And then of those that are closest to the tools, we need to start with the shortest, the most recurring tasks first. Now, this is extremely This is this is assumed to be counterproductive, but is actually the correct way to scale. And the reason it is assumed to be counterproductive is that most business owners want to start with the most important and the most urgent systems first, right? Since they believe that these will have the biggest impact on their team and their company. And you might be able to agree with this statement, because I'm sure that you enrolled into the Dream Team Intensive to solve a large, urgent, and important problem. Now I'm telling you we're not going to be starting with those problems. Now, there's a very good scientific reason for that I'm going to get to on the next slide. However, to give you some context for that, important systems are typically quite long and they manage a lot of moving parts. Urgent systems are typically quite complex, with choices needing to be made at higher speeds. And I'm sure you can agree with each of those translations and definitions. Now, when we start with the important systems, which is of course the longest systems with moving parts, right? When we start with the important systems with the longer and moving parts, we aren't going to have enough time to build them out correctly, because they're quite long and there's a lot of moving parts. And it is very rare that any business will have an excess of spare time lying around to build a long process. And when we start with the most urgent systems, which of course are quite complex and need to be delivered at speed, we most likely do not have the process engineering skill set yet, since we're starting with the most important and urgent tasks. We don't have the process engineering skill set yet to completely build these systems to the degree where they make our business life easier. So to illustrate this problem a lot more clearly, when we start with the most important systems first, which are the longer ones with a lot of moving parts, we aren't going to have time to create them correctly, okay? And of course, when we start the most urgent ones, which are complex and that need to be delivered at speed, we probably don't have the skill set to engineer those processes properly. So in order to create important systems and urgent systems, we need time and we need skill. And if we are just starting out on our process engineering journey, we probably haven't got a lot of time and we probably haven't got a lot of skill. People overlook the fact that designing processes is a skill set. It needs to be learned. It needs to be practiced, just like any other skill set in all of our lives, okay? So, therefore, starting with the most important and the most urgent systems, the ones that we think we need to make first, is not the correct methodology. Instead, it is far easier to scale with the shortest, the most recurring processes first. And the reason for this will become very clear. And that simply put is that when we start with the most shortest tasks, it is likely that task is not that impactful to her business, right? I mean, how impactful is a short task? You know, clean this, drop off that, pay this, send that. Like, those aren't that impactful to the company. So if we start with the most shortest tasks and we create them incorrectly, we can probably fix the error before it has any real effect on our business. This is a good place for us to practice the skill of building different systems. As with an important process, if we get that and we start with that first, those quite long processes, those quite complex processes with different moving parts, and if we get those wrong, well, that can really screw us up. We could lose clients, we could lose inventory, we could lose resources, we could lose our team, right? So therefore, we start with the most shortest tasks that are not impactful, that are the least likely to impact the business if done incorrectly. This is the place where we can practice the skill of building different systems, okay? And when we start with the most recurring tasks, this will create an excess ROI time for us, which can be reinvested in developing more systems, okay? So the most recurring tasks are the things that we do every single day. And the reason for this is twofold. The first is that it's very uncommon for any of us, for us as the CEO, for us as the team leader, for us as our team, to lose our entire day on to lose our entire day on doing a single project. Okay, usually we lose our entire day on these routine tasks, answering emails, following up to invoices, helping customers support, replying to social media, ordering stock, coordinating inventory. It's all these routine, recurring tasks that drain us and that drain our time and our team's resources. It's very unlikely that we lose our time, our team's time, and our resources by focusing on a single project until it is complete. It's the old saying of death by 1,000 tasks rather than a single task, okay? So if we focus on the most recurring tasks first, we never have to do those tasks again, right? It could be answering emails. Once we build a process for that, we never have to answer emails ever again. And that might create an excess 45 minutes per week. Amazing. That 45 minutes per week will last us the entire year. Now, we can take that time and spend it creating more systems, right? So we start with the most recurring tasks first. This will create a return on investment of time for us, which can be reinvested in more systems as well. So if we know that the shortest task will allow us to practice the skill of developing different processes and systems, and we know that starting with the most recurring task will create an excess of time for us that can be spent creating even more systems, then we should be starting with the most recurring, the most shortest processes first. Because when we start with the most shortest process, we practice the skill. When we start with the most recurring processes, we create the time. And that skill can be used to develop the urgent processes that are complex, because now we've practiced the skill of creating unimpactful processes. We can hopefully graduate up and create more and more urgent processes that are more complex with more moving parts. And now that we have created time, an excess of time, by focusing on the recurring tasks, we may have now created a full 8 free hours for us per week. Well, now we can properly create the important processes because we have that time, right? Now, the reason behind this is that in order to create urgent processes with lots of moving parts that have high impact on our company, we need skill. We need to be a good process engineer. Otherwise, if we create an urgent process poorly, it can potentially ruin our company, lose clients, and cause us to lose cash flow. If we try to create important processes, we need the time to create them because they're probably quite impactful and quite long. Otherwise, they would not be deemed as important. So therefore, before we address the important processes, we need to create time. And how do we create time? Is we remove things that are draining our time through creating processes on the most recurring task first. Therefore, we always start with the most shortest, the most recurring processes first. I know you might not want to. I know you might want to jump into the most urgent, the most important processes first. That's not the way to go about it. Trust us inside the Dream Team Intensive. Follow our instructions, and above all, complete the work and do the work as we say. And I'm telling you, shortest, the most recurring processes first, above the most urgent, the most important ones that are screaming for your attention. Now, when we are deciding on which processes to build next, we need to prioritize those that will have a long lifespan. Okay, so if we come back to what have been the overarching themes, is we need to understand before we systemize. We need to start from the tools back first. As we start from the tools back, we need to then prioritize the most shortest, the most recurring processes. And then inside those, we need to prioritize those that have a long lifespan. Okay, now how we can determine this is that we can ask ourselves, how long will this process operate before I need to completely rebuild it? As an example, some tools in our industry, they change over time. How often they change will influence how often we need to rebuild the process. I cannot tell you how annoying it is to have to build a process that is dependent on some tool or some app or some wholesaler that suddenly goes out of business or that suddenly changes their policies, right? Now we need to rebuild the entire process again. So we need to judge this before we create those processes. And we also need to ask ourselves, how long will this choice last before I need to decide on it again? As an example, if we give our sales teams random bonuses at the end of each month, we need to make that choice 12 times each year. 12 choices each month, end of each month, 12 months in a year. Rather than sitting down, talking to our sales manager and making the choice once and having a set bonus structure engineered into a process. We want to reduce the number of choices that we need to make because choices drain time and energy, and we want to reduce the number of times we need to completely rebuild any process. Okay, and a good example that we experience in our own personal lives is at the end of each day, you might have to decide what you're going to eat for dinner. That's a choice that needs to be made probably 356 times per year, as opposed to if you have a meal plan, you might only have to make that choice maybe 4 times per year because you stick to a meal plan for 3 months at a time. And the energy, I can tell you, that has saved me from making a choice 4 times per year versus 356 times per year has been tremendous, right? I don't have to think about it. I don't have to change that process, right? So this skill set has not only applied in our company in terms of how long will this process operate before we need to rebuild it and how long will this choice last for, it also applies to our personal lives as well. I mean, how long do you spend choosing a film to watch on Netflix, as opposed to sitting down and maybe brainstorming, okay, these are the 100 films I would like to watch before I die, right? So that's a good example of it as well. And then also, how long until I need to change this? As an example, you build a process to prepare a new trending meal. If you own a restaurant or some hospitality company that has generated an influx of customers to your restaurant. Maybe there's a new trend on TikTok, or maybe a news article in your in the town where your restaurant is has now been praising a new type of vegan diet or a new type of paleo diet, and you see influx of customers coming to your hospitality venue to order that kind of food. So therefore you spend weeks now perfecting a whole new menu, a whole new process to cater to that new audience, only to see the trend start to die down after a few months. Okay, so you need to be careful of, is this a long-term choice or is this a trend that I'm trying to jump on and spending a lot of time creating processes, even though it might not be a long-term play. And of course, building processes is great. However, if we need to keep rebuilding the same process once every single month, or are stuck making the same decisions per week, it really is a waste of our time and can be deemed completely worthless as well. The whole objective behind creating a process and creating everything that we're talking about here inside the Dream Team Intensive is it so that we can set and forget about it and not have to worry about it ever again as well. And Jeff Bezos, despite what you might think of him in terms of a tyrant or a evil genius of course knows a lot about designing processes and systems to scale. Right, so as an example, he has been quoted to say, "I very frequently get the question, what's going to change in the next 10 years? And that is a very interesting question. It is a very common one. I almost never get the question, what's not going to change in the next 10 years? And I submit to you that second question is actually more important of the two, because you can build a business around the things that are going to be stable in time. In our retail business, we know that customers want low prices, and I know that is going to be true 10 years from now. They want fast delivery and they want a vast selection. It is almost impossible to imagine a future 10 years from now where a customer comes up and says, "Jeff, I love Amazon. I wish the prices were a little higher." Or, "I love Amazon. I wish you deliver a little more slowly." Impossible. And so the effort we put into those things, spinning those things up, we know the energy we put in today will still be paying off dividends for our customers 10 years from now. Okay, so we need to focus on the longevity of our process. What's not going to change? We need to focus on decisions that we make. Okay, now this does not mean that we ignore things that are going to change. No. We simply need to prioritize the ones that are not going to change, that are going to have a long lifespan first. Once we create those, then we can address the more changing processes. Okay, we need to start with those that aren't going to change first, because as we design those, they're probably taken care of for the next 10 years. And then, since they are taken care of and we don't have to worry about it, then we can worry about the more dynamic processes that change maybe from year to year, or that change from quarter to quarter as well. So a few key points to really drill that home is, how long will this operate before I need to completely rebuild it? How long will this choice last before I need to decide on it again? And how long until I need to change this as well? And one last component that I want to touch on before we close up this training module here is identifying and removing bottlenecks. Okay, so one of the key goals of any system is to identify and remove bottlenecks. A bottleneck can be defined as anything that is limiting the desired output. Okay, so if, for example, the desired output here is for cars to get to where they are going, then the bottleneck can be actually identified as this section right here. Or if, in the other example of our company, the desired output is to deliver a steady flow of new customers per day, and then the bottleneck can be identified as Thursday, whereby things might be late, they might be delayed, they might be overdue, or there might be problems with the product quality. Now, the faster we can remove bottlenecks in our company, the faster the desired output will reach 100%. Now, the better we can identify bottlenecks, the more long-lasting our process will be. We can achieve this by looking upstream to the true cause, not the effect. Now, the hardest part of any problem is identifying it, right? So, for example, here, you could simply try to expand the road, right? And that might actually solve that problem. However, a better approach would be trying to figure out, sure, we could expand this road, but why are there so many cars coming down here? Is it that they traveled down this road to turn off? Well, if that's the case, couldn't we create a turn off here so that we can kind of reduce the number of cars coming down? I mean, that's one solution. Or maybe there's a problem upstream whereby all these cars coming down here are coming down here because the other route is blocked. Interesting. Well, let's see what's going on up there instead. Okay, so the hardest part is trying to identify what is actually causing that problem. Now, sure, we could just expand the roadway, but that's a temporary solution rather than getting to the root cause. Or inside our workflow, we might deem that the staff on Thursday aren't as good, when really it could be that maybe on Monday, when this team is completing maybe 10% less of their work, as we can see, that work might be left for Thursday's team. Now they have to catch up on Monday's work, which is extremely overdue, which now they have to handle the work, they have to handle customer complaints, and they have to set up their own work for Thursday. That could be the reason why they're so far behind, as opposed to the team's not as good on Thursday, right? So we need to look at the problem and try to identify it, as opposed to just taking it for what it is. So the 4 key points that we covered there in the order that we covered them was, in order to start scaling, we need to, of course, understand before we systemize. When we understand that task, we need to then start from the tools back. Okay, what is the closest to the tools and the most furthest away from the customer? Once we identify those, we need to look for, within those tasks, the most shortest, the most recurring tasks, and start with those. Now, once we identify those, we'll then need to prioritize. Okay, what process can I start today that will have a long lifespan, and so that I don't have to make that choice again in the future? This is how we create freedom, because when we start with things that aren't going to change, we don't ever have to complete that ever again. When we start with the most recurring, we get a positive return on our time per week, per month, per year. And when we start on the most shortest, we get to practice our skill set of creating processes in a safe environment. When we start from the tools back, it prevents any problems that might derail our customers, our teams, our company when we start creating processes. And when we understand before we systemize, we can prevent problems, we can hire correctly, we can set expectations, we can lead by example. Okay, I mean, if you were employed, who would you admire more? A CEO who demands a schedule, who has never completed the work themselves, or a CEO who knows how long it should take and sets a realistic schedule, and you know that they used to work on the tools themselves, right? I mean, that's a lot more inspiring to a team, as opposed to someone screaming a schedule that they don't know anything about as well. And of course, identifying and removing bottlenecks as they come up. So that concludes this training video here. And of course, we spoke about the 3 machines and the journey as we go in and out of them. The new model to scale more with less, and of course, how to start scaling correctly. Now, trust this process. I know you want to fast forward and start to build everything urgently. However, if we skip this basic understanding, you will drown in problems in the future. And I've seen those that succeed inside the Dream Team Intensive complete the work. You have to do the work. You have to trust us and keep doing the work. You can't skip the work, and learning this is part of the work. So with that being said, I'll see you inside the next training module, and as always, keep doing the work.